Hello. Alright, so, studio is acting up in all kinds of ways, so, um, having a hard time of it, so I'm going to do it a little bit different. Hopefully, this will change, and I'll add different things as the semester goes by. But, truth be told, this is just a quick thing. I wanted to get you guys and gals thinking outside the box, thinking about history, which you've probably never done before. I'm sure that everything you've always done has been about memorizing and regurgitating and then just barfing it back up onto a test without ever really giving it any of it real consideration. All right. So you guys and gals have the lectures under files. And remember, what I told you I want you guys and gals to do is either save it on your device or print it out so you can take your notes on the PowerPoint, whether it is a physical, tangible thing that you printed out or on the PowerPoint that you saved onto your device. So do that right now if you haven't done it already. So, pause, go do that, come back. So, what we're going to cover today is what is history. All right. And with this, how I want to get this started is give you some quotes from some of my favorite, beloved authors of the 20th century. One comes from William Faulkner, a Southern writer that has done more than anybody else to give us a vivid description of how the South was and what it kind of is in essence. And the other is James Baldwin. Baldwin, a very important African-American writer in the mid-20th century and very important in activism for human rights. All right. The first quote comes from the older man, William Faulkner. It comes out of a book called Requiem for a Nun. All right. The quote is, "The past is never dead. It's not even past." The book itself, Requiem for a Nun, is about a man that has lost pretty much everything in his life, mainly due to his abusive way of life. Alcohol, drugs, everything else. He's spiraled out of control, and he's finally lost himself. All right, so with this, with the past is never dead, it's not even past, the thing that's important to remember and how it relates to history is that this is saying that he is what he was made to be. He is, at this moment, the culmination of his past. All right. The other quote, "People are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them." That is from Baldwin. And you get the same idea of this. In other words, it's important for all of us to remember that we are what we have been made to be. All right. We have become what we are because of what we have lived through. All right. So in many ways, this is an essence of how I approach history. All right. So with that, let's move into and talk about what is history. All right. In the discussion questions, I gave you guys two different sections. The first question is, what is history? All right. For me, it has always been very simple. Very early on, I was heavily influenced by our first American intellectual historian, Carl Becker. Becker was an early 20th century progressive, and his quote that sticks with me is, "History is the recollection of humanity." All right? Meaning that history really is just taking that last word, humanity, about us. Right? history is the recollection of humanity. So really, history is, in essence, about us. All right, what we touch, what touches us, it's the story of us. All right. Also, the other important word I want you to really focus on is recollection. Recollection, of course, is about remembering, recalling, thinking. What we remember about our past. All right. This is a big thing. Remember, remembering is very fluid, very malleable, right? How you remember things changes through time. All right. So, example. After I finished up a lot of my work in California, I came back here, came back home. All right. And when we moved back here, I put my oldest in the school that I had gone to when I was growing up, River Hill. A small private school out in St. Florian. And when we came back, I went in to do all the paperwork, to visit and get all the ideas, right? And when I came in, the smells, the sights, things just came flooding back in, right? Everything came flooding back in. I was thinking, it's like, oh, wow. Kept thinking I couldn't believe all of this stuff that I had forgotten. But at the same time, looking at it in the frame of mind that I was then, it's like, this place is so much smaller. It's not as big as I remember it being. When they took me out to the playground, we looked around, and it's like, what happened to the woods? I remember playing out in the woods with my friends. It's like, well, it's right there. It's just those 12 trees. It's always been that way. So it's like, oh, it wasn't woods. It's just a little thing of trees. So, remembrance. All right? Remembrance is a fickle thing. It's very fluid, and it changes. All right? So, with Carl Becker's definition, history is the recollection of humanity. It's about what we remember. And that is something that changes a lot. All right, keep that in mind. So, with this, kind of what is history kind of going on with my definition of it? History is the story and the study of memories about people and the happenings in the world around them. All right, so we've got what is history. The next one that is still in that discussion question that I want you guys to answer for me is what makes history. What you have gotten throughout your K through 12 life is the tangible. All right. The tangible, of course, are the facts, the dates, the events, the artifacts, the documents, the places, the people, all of those kind of things. The tangible things, the easy things. All right. History is made up of more than just the tangible. All right. It's also made up of the intangible. The intangible are the myths, the legends, the folklore, oral traditions, lies, expectations, exaggerations, all of those things. All right. So, it's important to kind of look at this. All right. History, the history you've learned is kind of like an iceberg. Right? You have that 10% of the iceberg that's above the water. That's the tangible. But you also have the intangible, the things underneath the water. It plays a huge role in shaping things. All right. So, to kind of get you guys into this, like I said, the intangible are the myths, the legends, the folklore, the oral traditions, the lies, the exaggerations, our expectations. They're even like our civic religion. All right? Civic religion is very different. All right? Civic religion is how the governments, how the countries want you to view history. All right? So a civic religion is there to teach you how to be a good citizen. So a lot of the textbooks that you get growing up in public schools from K through 12 are civic religion. They're just trying to teach you how to be a good American citizen. All right? That's not real history. The history is made up of the tangible, the intangible. It's made up of our memories and our interpretations of those memories. So, to give you kind of an example of this, I'm sure all of you guys and gals have heard of George Washington, right? I know you have. I mean, he is our first president under the Constitution. And with George, everybody has heard the story of the cherry tree. All right? Remember, he chops down the cherry tree. His father asks him. He says, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. It was I that chopped down your cherry tree." Didn't happen. All right? It's a lie. It's part of civic religion. It is part of the government. It's part of the country, giving you a history that it wants you to know. All right? A little more detail into it. All right? That story of George Washington and the cherry tree comes to us from his very first biography of the early 1800s. It was written by a guy known as Parson Weems. All right? Parson Weems was an itinerant minister, which means he was a traveling preacher. He went around all over Virginia preaching the gospel. According to Parson Weems, he was the private preacher of the Washington family. All right? So he is, according to him, the main source of Christianity for George and the Washingtons. So when he puts out this book, everybody accepts it as gospel truth, so to speak, right? That this man watched George grow up. So of course he knows the story. Of course he knows all of this. So throughout the 1800s, that book was the most important book about Washington, even into the early 20th century, on past World War I, on past the Roaring '20s, and into the Great Depression. It's not until around that time that historians started investigating and researching that book. And they found out that Parson Weems made the large majority of that book up. Completely fabricated. What he was trying to do was use George as a Jesus figure, showing how he wanted American men to be. Not a history, civic religion. So, that's an issue in history. It was then, it is now. You have to pay attention. People are wanting to heroify, vilify, create these entities. The job of the historian and the job of people studying history is to dig in and find the evidence and the facts. All right? So history is made up of the tangible, the intangible. So not only is it the facts, the dates, the events, the artifacts, the places, the people, it's also those myths, the legends, the folklore, the lies, the expectations, the exaggerations, all of these things. Another thing that we also include now that we didn't in the very recent past is oral traditions. All right. Oral traditions, what I mean by that is oral history. History that is passed down orally from generation to generation. In the past, history meant that it had to be written or documented. Since the 1960s to present, more and more people are accepting oral histories as pieces of evidence. All right. So, it's a lot of things that make up history. Not just the tangible, but also the intangible. All right. Another thing is, what should history be? I want to keep this short and simple. History should be the big picture. All right. Think about this. Imagine you're in a very old, massive southern house. All right. And you hear these things going on. And you go to this room and it's locked. So in this old southern house, of course, you've got these large, a large keel, right? So you can get down and kind of see a little bit of what's going on in the room. So you kneel down and look in through the keyhole. All right. That is basically a very poor look into history. A very tangible, a very narrow, tangible look. Imagine if you unlocked that door and just walked in. You saw everything, you smelled everything, you experienced everything, you hear everything. That's what you want in a history. So when you're studying the past, you want as much as possible. You don't want just the tangible, just the intangible. You don't want just anything. You want as much evidence as possible. All right. So, you've got fact and fiction, you've got nostalgia and sentimentality, you've got memories, you've got force, you've got happenstance, you've got ignorance, you've got perceptions, you've got opinions, you've got evidence. You pull everything and all you can together to try to create history. All right. So, the next one is that second discussion question, the second one you'd click on to answer. It is history bias or objective? All right. When I was growing up, the way I saw it as completely an objective thing. I did through most of my undergraduate career. I believed that if I could pull together and gather enough information, enough facts, enough data, enough everything, just pull it all in, gather it all in, that I could create a completely factual, evidence-based history. But for those of you that don't know, that's not history. All right, that's not history. It's chronicling. It comes to us from the English and others, but the big thing with chronicling is it just gives you the evidence, just gives you the facts, just gives you all this stuff, and lets you interpret for yourself. That's not history. All right, that's not modern American history. We gather all those facts, we use those primary sources, and then we put them through our modern lens. All right? We interpret. We show what happened and how it created what comes next. All right? So, in essence, to answer this question, is history biased or objective? It's both. Right? However, you're supposed to, strive to be as objective as possible. All of your interpretations of the past and how they created what we are should be based on facts. Should be based on tons and tons and tons of evidence. All right? With this, something to think about. For historians with this idea of bias and objectivity, there is healthy and unhealthy bias. Unhealthy bias is turning someone into a hero or a villain in the modern sense. That's unhealthy bias. That's not real history. That's civic religion, right? That's you trying to promote something. What history is really and really should push for is that objectivity, to push for the idea that this is what happened and this is what became of it. And this is, with the historian, this is what we lived through. All right. So, how do historians, what are the sources, right? Primary sources are what historians use to write their histories. All right. A primary source is, an old way of saying it, the cliche is, it's straight from the horse's mouth. In other words, they are newspapers, they are documents, they are artifacts, they are things that are from the time frame in which you are writing about. Those are primary sources. Those are what historians gather as much as they possibly can of and write their book. An example, something that you may want to use for the book review, if you want to choose to do the book review instead of a podcast review, is John Adams by David McCullough. Great biography of a very important founding father. For this book, he uses primary sources, memoirs, letters, newspapers, documents, anything and everything from the time frame in which Adams lived. He took all of this and used it to create his story of John Adams. So that biography, John Adams by David McCullough, is a secondary source. All right? The secondary source is a thing that is written based on primary sources. All right? That is what a historian does with his life. That is what he gives us. All right? He or she. All right. Another one is tertiary. And a lot of people get ideas from tertiary sources nowadays. A good example of a tertiary source would be somebody that had read the John Adams biography by David McCullough and also watched the HBO special John Adams, that little series starring Paul Giamatti. And he just created a page on the internet about John Adams based on those two sources. That's tertiary. Because that movie series from HBO was based on the book. The book is based on primary documents. Everybody get what I'm saying here? A tertiary source is thrice or more removed from primary sources. It is not history. It is somebody remembering what somebody else remembered from somebody else remembering from somebody. It goes on down. It is not real history. It is what somebody remembers somebody else saying that somebody else wrote. So, for history, the most important thing are primary sources. That's why I don't use textbooks, I use a documents book. That's why you guys and gals will be reading that documents book this semester. Those documents, the ones I choose for you to read each time for each lecture, are the ones that go along with what we're talking about. From the horse's mouth. From people that experienced this. All right. So, with this, history is a little bit, in my opinion, a little bit both biased and objective, but we have to make and strive to make history a healthy, biased, objective thing instead of an unhealthy. All right? So, what is history's role? There are multiple interpretations of every story, and we can and should argue about them all. But it needs to be done in a very civil way. An argument or a debate is a key thing that needs to happen in democracy and also in history. But it's important to remember, as far as debating or arguments go, this does not mean yelling at each other. This means bringing your evidence to the table and discussing it with others, and actually listening to other people. A historian has to have an open mind. All right? We have to have an open mind to look into the past, to look into the future, to look at what others are saying in the present. All right? So, the role of history is to encourage debate, but constructive debate. Debate that leads somewhere. Debate that leads people to think about things. All right? And to get new ideas. All right. So, the last thing I want to bring up is we study history to learn certain things. All right? We study history to learn what happened. We study history to learn how it happened. We study history to learn why it happened. And also, we study it to learn its significance. All right? The easy things. Why, how, and what. What happened, why it happened, how it happened. Those are the easy things in history. All right? Those are things that we can study that are based on those things of evidence. The significance is what takes interpretation. Why those things are important and why, how they shaped us is a little bit more, there's a lot more work to it. All right? So we study history to learn those things. The why, the what, the how, and the importance. All right? So, to keep this simple and quick, I'm not very good at this, but this semester it looks like it's going to make me learn brevity with these videos. I'm going to try to keep things simple, to the point. All right. To wrap this all up, history was made and then crafted by people. All right. So it's important to remember, from the past to the present, the history comes to us from individuals. And all individuals have motives, and we need to study that just as much as we need to study their evidence. All right. Another thing is history was not destined to be this way. It just happens to be this way. One of the problems with growing up with civic religion history, or feel-good history, or history in our public education system in any country, is that you get, with that highlight reel, you get this feeling that history is just about progress. Oh, look what they did, look what we've done, look what they did, look. Each generation is focused on this idea of progress. All right? That's not history. You can look at it that way, but it cheapens it. All right? History was not destined to be this way. And with that highlight reel and thought of progress, oh, look, we created democracy. Look, we ended slavery. Look, we have technology. Look, we keep going up, up, and up. No, we don't. Progress does not mean we keep improving. Progress just means we keep changing. All right? Keep that in mind. Every generation doesn't necessarily get better. It's just different. That's progress. Change. Improvement isn't necessarily part of it. All right? So, with studying this, what I want you guys to think about is the Founding Fathers. Really quickly, the Founding Fathers in our highlight reel look like gods. They look like founding deities rather than founding people. Most people look at them and think, I could never be like that. Look at what they are compared to what I am. Isn't it sad? But they did good things, they did bad things. And this semester, you're going to get a little bit of everything that these people did. They were human beings. They weren't founding deities. These were men that were good and bad, just like all of us. And that's an important thing to remember in history. All right? It wasn't destined to be this way. Don't think of history as a highlight reel. Think of history as a down and dirty look at life and how it made us what we are. All right? Also, remember, I'm really pushing this idea that history should not be a civic religion. I do not believe that history should be used by the government to push and promote how to be a good American, a good Brit, a good Nigerian, a good anything. That's not real history. That's civic religion. History is different, like I've been going over this whole time. Also, history should tell you why, well, no, let me rephrase that. History should tell you what happened and give us reasons why. All right, think about that. History should tell you what happened and give us reasons and pieces of evidence why. All right, history should tell us how we used to live, not how to live. All right, that's them back then. Us now, we're different. They help make us what we are. But the only way to move forward is to mentally, emotionally, and tangibly move forward. An idea from Einstein. Nothing's going to change if you keep doing things the same way over and over again. If you want a better world, you have to create a better world, right? Very simple. All right. So, I made this as quick as possible. This usually drags out for a couple of lectures. But I want you guys and gals to stay safe. I know it's crazy on campus right now. We're not sure what's going to be happening the coming week. And I will keep you updated via email and through announcements on Canvas. I'll continue to do it through the weekend. Be safe and take care.